Welcome to History Distilled, a place where we sample history in small pours. I'm your host, Tima Lindell, and today in our journey through the American Revolutionary War, we're going to look at the Battle of Brandywine. Time is short, let's jump into it. 1777. The British began cooking up a plan to crush the upstart rebels. General John Burgoyne was the chef, and he designed an elegant plan to surgically remove the heart of the rebellion in New England from the rest of the colonies. The plan called for a massive three-pronged pincer movement. Burgoyne would lead a powerful army south from Canada down the Hudson River. A second smaller force under Barry Sillinger would push east through the Mohawk Valley. And General William Howe was expected to drive his main army north from New York City. The three forces would converge on Albany, sealing off New England and strangling the revolution. Lord George Germain, the official in London responsible for the war, loved the plan and approved it. General Howe had different plans. He had become obsessed with a different prize, Philadelphia. At the time, Philadelphia was the largest city in British North America, population over 20,000. More importantly, it was the seat of the Second Continental Congress, the political heart of the rebellion. Howe was convinced that its capture would be a decisive blow. He believed the large loyalist population in Pennsylvania rise up, join his cause, effectively ending the war in the mid-Atlantic. He proposed his Philadelphia campaign to Lord George Germain as well. Germain approved the plan, but he had mistakenly believed Howe could capture Philadelphia and still be available to support Burgoyne's advance on Albany. But Howe heard what he wanted to hear and decided to go full gas on his plan, completely ignoring Burgoyne's plan. In fact, Howe sent letters to both Germain and Burgoyne, making it clear he had no intention of marching north. He was taking his army to Philadelphia, and Burgoyne was on his own. But Howe's execution of his own plan was, let's call it, interesting. Instead of a swift overland march through New Jersey, he chose a long, tortuous route by sea. On July 23rd, a massive fleet of over 260 ships began embarking nearly 17,000 British and German Hessian troops at Sandy Hook, New Jersey. When the fleet reached the mouth of the Delaware Bay, Howe received faulty intelligence about American defenses on the river. Fearing impassable obstructions, he made another fateful choice. He ordered the fleet to turn south and sail all the way around to the Chesapeake Bay. For 34 agonizing days, his army was cooped up in the sweltering holds of the transports. The journey was miserable. Men fell sick. Horses died. But finally, August 25th, his exhausted army finally landed at Head of Elk, Maryland. They were now just 55 miles southwest of Philadelphia. The long sea voyage had not only weakened his army, it had wasted the entire summer fighting season. During this time, the Americans had no idea where the British were headed. To them, the massive British fleet had just vanished into the Atlantic. Washington's intelligence was poor, and he was left to guess at Howe's destination. Was he going south to Charleston? Or was it, as Washington suspected, Philadelphia? When news finally arrived that Howe's armada had been spotted in the Chesapeake Bay, the objective became crystal clear. The British were coming for the capital. And Washington was ready to make a stand. In late August, he marched his army of nearly 14,600 Continentals to Delaware, where they set up a defensive position. But after a brief skirmish at Couch's Bridge, the British moved north, away from Washington's defensive encampment. Washington was forced to abandon his defensive position and moved his troops to the rolling hills and thick woods along the eastern bank of the Brandywine Creek. This creek was a natural obstacle on the main road between Baltimore and Philadelphia, and was the ideal spot for a battle. The Great Road crossed the Brandywine River at Chad's Ford, and it was near this ford where Washington set up his headquarters. He was determined to fight on this ground he had chosen himself. Washington deployed his army with care. The center of his line, anchored at Chad's Ford, was his strongest point. Here he placed the divisions of General Nathanael Greene and Brigadier General Anthony Wayne, two of his most capable commanders. Their troops straddled the Nottingham Road and were supported by Colonel Thomas Proctor's artillery, which was dug in on the heights overlooking the ford. To the south, covering the lower fords, he posted two brigades under General John Armstrong. His left flank, Washington believed, was secure. Washington's main concern was his right flank, which stretched north from Chadds Ford along the creek. He believed it was the Army's most vulnerable point. He gave overall command of this crucial wing to Major General John Sullivan. Sullivan's command included a force of about 4,000 men tasked with guarding the upstream fords. Washington believed he had accounted for all of the possible crossings. Herein lay the fatal flaw in the American plan. Washington's intelligence failed him. He had sent his best troops, the elite riflemen commanded by Daniel Morgan, north to help oppose Burgoyne's invasion. The cavalry he had available under Colonel Theodoric Bland proved ineffective at reconnaissance. As a result, Washington's understanding of the local geography was dangerously incomplete. He and his generals were completely unaware of two unguarded fords, Trimble's Ford on the west branch of the Brandywine and Jeffrey's Ford on the east branch. These were located several miles upstream, beyond the view of Sullivan's patrols. And the British capitalized on this failure of intel. While Washington's patrols stumbled blindly, General Howe was receiving pinpoint intelligence from the local population. Remember, the War of Independence was also a civil war, pitting neighbor against neighbor. Howe's operational advantage came directly from Loyalist Joseph Galloway, who was the former Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly. Galloway provided Howe with a detailed map of the region, explicitly marking the unguarded fords that would allow the British to bypass Washington's entire defenses. While Washington prepared for a frontal assault at Chadds Ford, Howe, armed with superior intelligence, was preparing to walk right around his flank. The morning of September 11th arrived wrapped in a dense, heavy fog. It clung to the fields and woods along the Brandywine. Under its cover, the two-pronged British attack began to unfold. The first prong was all noise and fury. At dawn, German General Wilhelm von Kniphausen led his column of roughly 6,800 British and Hessian soldiers straight down the road to Chadds Ford. This was the feint, the grand diversion. Kniphausen's vanguard quickly made contact with Brigadier General William Maxwell's Corps of Light Infantry just west of the creek. The Corps put up a sharp fight, but by 10:30 a.m., Kniphausen had pushed Maxwell's men back across the Brandywine. Kniphausen then deployed his troops along the western heights and began a thunderous, but largely superficial, artillery bombardment. The cannonade was designed to do one thing: fix Washington's gaze firmly on his center, convincing him that the British main attack was coming directly at Chadds Ford. While Kniphausen's cannons roared, the second prong of the attack, the real attack, was moving in silence. At 5 a.m., hours before the bombardment began, General Howe and his most trusted subordinate, General Charles Cornwallis, had set off with the main body of the army. This was a massive force of about 9,000 men. They were guided by their loyalist scouts as they embarked on a grueling 17-mile march to the north. They were creating basically a great flanking maneuver, a near-perfect replica of the tactic Howe had used to crush the Americans at the Battle of Long Island just 1 year earlier. They were a ghost army marching up the Great Valley Road, far beyond the sight of Washington's patrols, heading for the unguarded Trimble's and Jeffrey's fords. Back at his headquarters, Washington was caught in a storm of confusing and contradictory information. Around 11 a.m., he received a message from Colonel James Ross, whose scouts had spotted a large British column on the Great Valley Road far to the north. This was the first hint of the flanking maneuver. But just as Washington began to react to this threat, another report arrived contradicting the first. General Sullivan forwarded a message from a militia officer, Major Joseph Spear, who had just come from Martin's Tavern near the forks of the Brandywine. Spear confidently reported that he had seen no sign of the enemy on the northern roads. This single faulty report was nearly disastrous. It convinced Washington that the earlier intelligence from Ross must have been a mistake, or perhaps described only a small British reconnaissance party. He concluded that Kniphausen's force at Chadds Ford must be the main British army after all. The terrible truth did not reveal itself until after 2 p.m. A patriot farmer named Squire Thomas Cheney had seen the British column with his own eyes. He galloped frantically to Washington's headquarters. Out of breath, covered in dust, He burst in and warned the general that the main British army had crossed the Brandywine far upstream and was marching to strike his rear. Washington, still swayed by Major Spear's report from earlier, was skeptical. But Cheney's desperate sincerity, followed quickly by confirming reports from his own officers, finally shattered the illusion. The British were not in front of him, they were on his flank, and they were closing in. The revelation sent a shockwave through the American command, leaving Washington in a desperate race against time. His entire right flank was exposed and about to be crushed. He immediately ordered 3 divisions on that flank, commanded by Sullivan, Lord Stirling, and Adam Stephen, to disengage from their positions along the creek and execute a complex wheeling maneuver to the north. Their objective was to form a new line of battle on the high ground near the Birmingham Meeting House. The maneuver was chaotic. The troops, numbering some 4,000 men, scrambled over rough terrain under immense pressure. General Sullivan, in overall command of the wing, struggled to get his own division into the proper position. The new front was a patchwork defense, hastily assembled just moments before the storm broke. And around 4 p.m., the British attacked. The elite of Howe's army surged forward with disciplined precision, their bayonets gleaming. They crashed into the improvised American line on Birmingham Hill. The fight that erupted was some of the most ferocious of the entire war. General Thomas Conway, an Irish-born French officer serving with the Americans, was a veteran of many European battles. He stated flatly that he had, quote, never saw so close and severe a fire. Initially, the American lines held firm, but despite their heroic stand, the American position was just untenable. Their hastily formed lines were outnumbered and outflanked, and the British pressed their advantage relentlessly. Sullivan's division, caught in an exposed position, was the first to break. The collapse cascaded down the line. In complete disarray, the Americans were driven from Birmingham Hill. As the American right flank crumbled, the battle entered its final desperate phase. General Knyphausen, who had been patiently applying pressure at Chad's Ford all day, saw his opportunity. Hearing the roar of Cornwallis's attack in the American rear, he finally unleashed his main assault across the Brandywine Creek. His British and Hessian troops stormed through the shallow water directly into the teeth of General Wayne's division. Wayne's men had held the center for hours, but now their flank was exposed and the weight of the entire battle was crashing down on them. They put up a stubborn, hour-long defense, but they were hopelessly outnumbered and eventually were forced to give way. With both his center and right wing collapsing, Washington's army was on the verge of being encircled and annihilated. In this moment of extreme crisis, Washington made the most important decision of the day. He turned to his most reliable subordinate, General Nathanael Greene, whose divisions were being held in reserve. He ordered Greene to march his men to the rear and form a new defensive line to cover the army's retreat. What followed was one of the most remarkable feats of the entire war. Greene's division executed a forced march that covered nearly 4 miles of rough terrain in just 45 minutes. It's an incredible speed for an 18th century army carrying full gear. And they arrived just in time, deploying as a steadfast rear guard on a ridge south of the small village of Dilworth. As dusk began to settle over the battlefield, Greene's men, joined by the exhausted remnants of the divisions that had fought on Birmingham Hill, made their stand. For a crucial hour, they held off the full force of the pursuing British army. Their disciplined volleys stopped the British advance cold. Soon, the sun set and darkness fell across the fields that were littered with the dead and wounded. The fierce resistance of Greene's rear guard, combined with the sheer exhaustion of the British troops who had been marching and fighting for well over 12 hours, finally brought the battle to an end. A British officer later wrote with frustration that they, quote, only wanted a few more hours of daylight, unquote, for it would have allowed them to capture Washington's entire army and ended the rebellion. Greene's stand had saved the Continental Army. It was under the welcome cover of night that Washington led his battered but intact army on a long, orderly retreat. They marched 20 miles to the safety of Chester, Pennsylvania. His army was beaten, but it had survived to fight another day. The British were too tired to follow, so they made their camp on the battlefield they had won. And it was in the pale light of the morning on September 12th that the grim cost of the battle became clear. The pastoral landscape of the Brandywine Valley, dotted with Quaker farms, meeting houses, had been transformed into a scene of carnage. Dead and wounded soldiers from both armies laid scattered across the fields and in the woods. The scale of suffering was so great that General Howe took the unusual step of sending a message to Washington under a flag of truce, inviting him to send American surgeons back to the battlefield to help care for the hundreds of wounded men his army had been forced to leave behind. The human cost was steep, particularly for the Americans. While exact figures are difficult to ascertain, the Continental Army suffered 300 men killed, 600 wounded, and another 400 captured by the British. The approximately 1,300 casualties were almost 10% of Washington's army. In addition to the loss of men, they were forced to abandon 11 valuable artillery pieces, a significant blow to their firepower. But the losses weren't all on the American side. The British and Hessian forces also paid a price. Their casualties were significantly lower, but still substantial. They had 93 killed, 488 wounded, totaling approximately 587 men lost to the fighting. The defeat at Brandywine had immediate and severe strategic consequences. It shattered the last major defensive line protecting Philadelphia. News of the battle sent waves of panic through the capital. Members of the Continental Congress, realizing their city was about to fall, hastily packed their papers and fled. They evacuated first to Lancaster and then moved further west to the small town of York, Pennsylvania, a place which would serve as a temporary capital of the rebellion for the next 9 months. And the defeat tested the Army's spirit, and Washington found it remained strong. Washington himself, in a letter to Congress, wrote that despite the loss, he was, quote, happy to find the troops in good spirits. And they had faced the full power of the British Army, endured a clear tactical defeat, and not been broken. They had proven to the British, and probably more importantly to themselves, that they could stand and fight. The battle was also a harsh but vital lesson in generalship for Washington and his commanders. It brutally exposed their weaknesses in intelligence and reconnaissance, shortcomings that Washington would work tirelessly to correct in the coming months. But the campaign itself was far from over. Washington, though defeated, was not deterred. He was determined to protect vital American supply depots located to the west of Philadelphia, and he was willing to risk another battle to do so. I hope you enjoyed this look at the Battle of the Brandywine. One thing I did wonder after making this video was how might the outcome of the battle differed if Washington's intelligence had been as effective as Howe's? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this video interesting or learned something new, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It truly helps the channel grow and allows me to make more videos like this one. Again, thanks for watching, and as always, have a great day if you want to.